What do you get when you take a filmmaker like Rob Zombie, who's known for death, mayhem, destruction in his films, as well as being a literal rock god, at least he was 20, 30 years ago, and you give him The Munsters, one of the oldest and campiest television show classics in our societal history. You get a movie that I watched tonight called The Munsters that has not gotten a lot of love, but it's actually not as bad as people out there might lead you to believe. And I'm going to explain all that here on this episode of Podio Commentary. Welcome back to the show. Kind of revamping it, going to be doing more reviews over here in order to build out this particular channel a little bit more, because I just want a place to talk about movies that is not bogged down by just movie news or drama or anything like that. I got the $3 Theater channel. I do Hollywood After Dark. A lot of that stuff happens over there. But I just want to talk about movies. And so tonight I sat down with my family. We do this about once a week. We sit down and we watch a movie. And tonight I just remembered that Blonde and The Munsters came out. And I thought, you know what? Why don't we check out The Munsters? Because my 4-year-old and my 3-year-old cannot watch Blonde for good reason. And maybe they shouldn't have watched The Munsters either. Not to say that the movie was terrible. It was not something that I would go back to on like any real given occasion. It's not a movie that I would ever like buy and add to my collection with the intent of actually watching again. I might buy it if it's super cheap to have it in my collection as more of like a centerpiece to start off a conversation. Someone comes over and they look at my wall and they go, "Oh, you spent hard-earned money on the Munsters DVD. Why?" And then, of course, you can have a conversation about it. But I do want to spend a lot of time talking about the merits of the film, because I do ultimately believe, looking at what Rob was trying to do with the movie, he succeeded in what he was attempting. And that, of course, is going to be lost on a lot of the younger generation. And I think he knew that going in, and I think everyone involved in this project knew that going in. There is like a silliness factor in this movie. There is very much a hilarity factor in this movie that is just kind of like, it's cringe, but sometimes it lands. So sometimes it actually hits the mark and you're like, oh, okay, I'm actually okay to keep going with this because there's elements of it that are still pretty funny. And I'm still kind of engaged in where the story's going, even if there isn't much of a story to begin with, because that is something that the movie never really sets out to tell you in any of the marketing and any of the information around it. This is a prequel. This is a prequel to the 1960s show. I mean, if you've seen the trailer, which many of us did, and many of us rightfully mocked because the trailer was just not very good, you know that this is about how Herman and how Lily end up getting together. And of course, you know, moving to Los Angeles, moving to 1313 Mockingbird Lane, because it starts off with them in Transylvania. And Lily is on a date with Nosferatu, who's his name is Orlok, and he's got a lot of love for rats. But what I found to be really kind of fascinating about that particular interaction was it was set in modern times. Like the movie felt like it was made for like the 1960s. In fact, whenever they show other cars, or when they go to Paris, they go to things like that, there's nothing modern about the movie. The televisions are in, I think, black and white and color, right? They have old Woody Woodpecker cartoons. They have old breaking news alerts, like old late night TV talk shows that are all done in a certain style. You have all of these elements that make it feel like you're back in the 1960s. But the reason why this movie also kind of like brings in a lot of contemporary concepts is, while Lily and Orlok are having a date, she goes, "Oh, well, on your dating profile, it only showed 2 interests in the Black Plague and pestilence." And she's like, "Aren't those the same thing?" And he's like, "Yes, yes, they're so good. I love them too. So I love them equally." You know, and you're like, all right, okay, here's where we're going with this. But I mean, the movie is PG. And while it is in fact aimed at a younger audience, there is some serious adult humor mixed within. And if you know anything about Rob Zombie's past, you know this is kind of par for the course, right? Because like one of the first jobs he had was a set designer on Pee-wee's Playhouse back in the day. And I believe before he worked on Pee-wee's Playhouse, he had actually done some work, I think, in like the camera department or something on the production side of adult entertainment. So he was obviously familiar with a lot of adult humor. Pee-wee's Playhouse very much had a lot of adult humor. If you've seen House of a Thousand Corpses or any of the Halloween movies or, his other films, like, again, he likes violence and gore and death and mayhem. So there was clearly going to be some elements of this, like, sprinkled throughout, I think, in order to make some of the older audience people kind of laugh and chuckle a little bit. And I don't even mean like parents necessarily. I mean like my parents, who would have been children in the 1960s when the show was on the air. My parents, who would have grown up watching the show week to week. See, I grew up watching it on Nick at Night on the Munster Mondays when they would do a 5-episode marathon. And every summer when I would go to my dad's house, because my dad had cable, I didn't have cable, I would watch Munster Mondays like every time I went. And I just enjoyed watching that block of Munsters of television. I thought it was great. I still love it. And so obviously the humor that is contained within is meant for people who are going to be above the age of 50. Now, Rob Zombie and Sherry Moon Zombie are now over the age of 50, so they're kind of still in that particular, that's like them kind of referencing their childhood, so to speak. I think if there's any way to describe the humor levels in this, I mean, there's a Viagra joke, or there's basically like a flaccid penis joke, right? An impotence joke in the beginning of the movie. You have at one point in time, the Count looking at a play ghoul, and he even opens the centerfold, and they show the centerfold. It's a pinup, and he's just like, ooh, and then Igor, the butler's like, oh, I like legs. And they have this conversation kind of very briefly about like what body parts on a female they prefer. Very weird in regards to that. And then again, it's just kind of like elements, a little bit of dirty humor pops up here, pops up there, little things that the adults are going to get. And the kids watching it will probably be bored to tears and not actually want to pay attention. Case in point, we turn the movie on. My 3-year-old crawls in my lap, falls right asleep, sleeps throughout the whole movie. My 4-year-old, it gets scared by some of the visual aesthetics in the film. She gets frightened by the lightning and the lights and the neon and the sounds. And, I had to keep trying to explain to her that it's not real. But once it started moving away from that, once we got through the first act of the movie, she was just bored by it. And that's okay, because it's not meant for her. You know what I mean? It's not meant for her to enjoy right now. Who knows? Maybe 20 years down the road, her and I could watch all the Munsters episodes, and then she comes back and she watches this, and it feels like it's going to lead right in to the old sitcom, because that is exactly what this is. This is 100% meant to be that kind of story. And I thought that was fine. I thought that was good. I enjoyed that well enough, because for me, I'm just watching it going like, okay, like it could be trimmed down so much in certain scenes. Like it could just be trimmed the hell down. It doesn't need to be as long as they make it. It's an hour and 49 minutes and you feel it. And I'll tell you, that's a problem. But what works in the movie, I think, is like, I was really kind of concerned at first about Sherry Moon Zombie being cast as Lily Munster. It's like, okay, Rob, we get it. You love your wife. You put her in everything. Nothing against that whatsoever. But she actually did a really good job as Lily. And she really tried to nail the mannerisms and nail the inflection of the voice and just the character in question. The Count did a good job also doing that as well. I was, this guy came out when the first trailer came out, and people started like just bashing the movie, right? They were just bashing the movie. This Daniel Roebuck is the guy's name. He comes out and he does a reaction to the trailer on his Vimeo of all places. And he defends the movie. He really defends the movie. He's like, no, man, like, you guys haven't seen it. We had a lot of fun making this. It's just really silly. And I, a lot of people mocked his response to this. Like, you're just an actor, blah, blah, blah. Your friends, blah, blah. But I'm watching this movie and I think back to that review and I'm like, no, this guy's clearly having fun. You can tell that they are clearly having fun making this movie. They're spoofing Sonny and Cher. They're spoofing Paris for a honeymoon. They get Spot. They get the little dragon monster. They get that in in Paris and whatnot. And it's just it's really funny. I mean, they even parody the old Frankenstein. When this is kind of funny too. I thought this was great, and I don't know if this is in the original. because I don't remember like watching the origins of the original show or anything. But when the person who dies, who Herman Munster, his brain, his brother is like the smartest man alive, and he's like one of the dumbest men alive. And that was the whole thing with trying to go and steal the smart guy's brain, but they steal the wrong guy's brain. And there you get Herman Munster. But what's funny about that is like when they're trying to bring him to life, you know, they have the doctor, what's his name? Dr. Wolfgang. Dr. Wolfgang is his character's name. And he's all like, it's alive. It's alive. You know, and he's totally like playing it up. I got a lot of Gene Wilder, Young Frankenstein vibes, obviously like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein vibes. You get a lot of vibes off of that. And it works really well for the scene they're trying to do. And of course, then Herman comes to life and he just starts telling all of these dad jokes. But what's really funny about that is when he comes to life and he starts telling all these dad jokes, everyone really likes it. Everyone really laughs at it. They hated him when he was a human, but he's a monster in Transylvania. And everyone seems to just be laughing at the humor. And he, again, is just kind of living in the moment, having a good time with this, and just kind of like yucking it up with everybody else. And it does work in those moments to sell the humor. A lot of those jokes are the kind of stuff I would say to my kids, the kind of stuff I jokingly say in live streams, although probably way more raunchy how I say it. But he's doing it here and it's working pretty well. It's establishing the character of Herman Munster. He's coming into being Herman. And while he'll never be the Herman Munster who we know, he has a lot of the facial expressions. He gets some of it. He doesn't get all of it. But I really was kind of curious about the casting process and all of this. And so looking into it a little bit, one of the reasons why Rob Zombie wanted to put this actor, Jeff Daniel Phillips, as Herman was because he knew him. He'd worked with him before and he didn't want to cast an unknown to him and have there not be chemistry with Sheri Moon Zombie, because that is part of the impetus of the show, the love that Lily and Herman have for each other and how it kind of just like breaks all barriers. And that is really kind of funny how the movie puts them together. Is Lily's just like lonely and probably horny, but she's lonely and she just wants someone who just kind of makes her blood run cold. So she sees Herman on like the Tonight Show, like Transylvania Tonight. I think it was Good Morning Transylvania, whatever. And then she sees him and he starts telling these stupid dad jokes and everyone there is laughing and she's just like smitten and just smitten. And then from there, what's so funny is like, apparently, you know, Herman just becomes this like pop star overnight. He becomes this massive, you know, he starts playing these clubs and he's putting out LPs and, you know, she shows on up and then they kind of just immediately hit it off and go from there. And that's like the A plot of the story. There's a B plot of the film that doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay. And that, of course, is the brother, Lester. Now, Lester is a wolfman and he is, you know, very much kind of like a Las Vegas lounge lizard type guy, you know, owes money to Zoya Krupp, this gypsy. And she wants the castle that the Count owns. She wants to have the house, the castle, because she was married to the Count. And he divorced her many years ago, and she vowed to get revenge. That's her motivation. Hell hath no fury like a lover scorned, basically is what it boils down to. But Lester owes her money, and she's like, look, if you want to pay off your debt and maybe get a little bit extra on the side, here's what I need from you is to get them to sign over the lease to the castle. Lester tricks Herman into doing that before the wedding. Herman signs it before they get legally married. And then from there, it's like that they just evict him. And they contact a lawyer who happens to be in jail. And the lawyer's basically like, well, you tough titties. You guys are up S Creek without a paddle, you know? And they go, all right, like no question about it. They're like, all right. And then they just like decide to leave and head to Los Angeles because I think Herman is like, well, I can just be a star. That part I did get a kick out of, because in essence, when you have someone like Herman Munster's character and they are a big fish in a small pond in their small town, And they're like, look, I can go to LA. Like they look at TV and there's like this, like, one horror movie monster type guy running a show. And Herman's like, that guy sucks. That guy's terrible. I hate that guy. Why would I even bother doing this? Why would I even bother? Come on, like we can do better than this guy. And they go out there and they think they're going to make it, but everyone, they're going to be frightened of them. But they show up on Halloween night and they end up, winning a Halloween costume contest, earning $1,500. Herman gets a job working as a gravedigger. And then the next morning he goes out and he sees the normal world for the first time and it frightens him like people seeing him for the first time. So you get this bit of a juxtaposition of the perspectives, which I thought was really interesting. But then instead of going to work, all of a sudden, broad daylight, Lester shows up. Again, total Wolfman garb. Says, hey, I went to Vegas, took the money that I got from, fleecing the house, and I struck it big. Here's your cut. We don't see how much money that they made, but they're now rich. Herman doesn't have to go to work. They can afford their house. They can live on Mockingbird Lane. And that's really about it. Then the movie ends. It's like, okay, it's going to pick up when the show does. Well, I'm like, okay, well, where's Eddie? And where's Cousin Marilyn? Obviously, this is a prequel. Obviously, this is designed in order to, kind of hopefully do well enough with either VOD sales, Netflix views, or home video sales to hope of getting more out of this. And to be fair, I could see that happening. I could see that happening because right now it's number 6. It's debuting number 6 on Netflix. So it's not blowing up the charts. But I think morbid curiosity is going to get the better of some people. And I think they might go in and find themselves having a little bit of a good time watching this film. They might find themselves going, okay, it's not so bad. It's not terrible. It's not great. But it's like one of those things you just kind of throw on in the background and you just kind of chuckle at some of the humor. And if you're a big Munsters fan, which, let's face it, a lot of our parents, the boomer generation might be, and they might find themselves liking this because it plays into those particular sensibilities with a little bit, just a spice, just a sprinkle of adult humor mixed in. Kids are going to hate it. Like, make no mistake, this is not going to be some kid's like favorite movie ever. They're just not going to get the references. They're not going to get the Sonny and Cher reference. They're not going to get like a lot of this. They're just not going to get a lot of the references. But let me talk about like what I like real quick, because I felt that the cinematography was very interesting. Zombie relied pretty heavily on like Dutch angles and a lot of camera movements that were kind of like, to me, they felt like they were indicative of the 60s, trying to show like an alternative vibe while watching this movie. The camera would twist and turn and pull and zoom. And I mean, it would just do all this stuff. And I mean, either it's designed that way because a lot of it was just kind of standing and talking. And so you just wanted it to look different. But I also felt it worked given the aesthetic of Transylvania. Transylvania has a lot of neon lights. It felt like Joel Schumacher's Batman. It just had a lot of neon lights, a lot of interesting things happening in the background. It's really funny. Again, like I said before, it's almost like it's set in the 1960s. But what they're doing is they've got like, they have strip clubs in the movie. Like when Orlok is walking Lily back to his place, they walk by a place called Live Dead Girls. And then also open massage parlor in the middle of the night. Like there's adult humor sprinkled in, kind of Burton-esque, maybe like Beetlejuice style humor to an extent, but really it's there. And it might fit the world. I mean, I don't know. I didn't grow up in the 60s. I didn't grow up in that kind of aesthetic. I mean, it kind of feels like it's pulling from like Sunset Boulevard, Whiskey A Go-Go type, like the mid 60s LA vibe, downtown LA vibe type stuff. It's weird. It's weird, but in a way it works, because how do you take something like The Munsters, black and white, sitcom on television, and try to flesh out the world in a way to where it's interesting visually, it's compelling narratively. I mean, it never really reaches a point narratively because, again, there's not a lot going on. This feels just like a movie, like that's like a pilot episode for a show. I think that's the best way to describe it. And that might actually be what he's going for. But again, The budget on this thing is low. I guarantee you under 10 million, probably less than that. This was shot in Budapest from November of 2020, I think, until June of 2021. And so they shot it for a while. I don't even understand how it took that long to shoot, to be honest with you. It was probably all the production design and getting everything ready to go. But they did. They shot it over that span of time. And the movie is definitely inexpensive. And I think Rob Zombie was pulling from every one of the tricks that he had learned from doing Pee-wee's Playhouse and doing the, White Zombie videos and doing the Rob Zombie videos and then doing House of a Thousand Corpses and Three from Hell and Devil's Rejects and Halloween and all of his movies that he's made prior. He was pulling from those in order to be able to really cobble this thing together. And on that perspective, or I should say from that perspective, as just a person who really likes movies and likes the art of film, I can respect the ever-loving hell out of that. But from a person who wants to watch this play out as like a decent movie, it definitely fell a bit flat. I was chuckling enough to keep going through it, but I did check my watch a couple times to see how much longer the movie was, because I was kind of ready for it to wrap itself up. And then when it got to the very end and it just didn't really have any kind of like what I felt was a valid climax, just kind of overdone, then I'm like, all right, you know what? Like, there's that. I will say again, it's worth a shot if you like dumb, silly stuff. That would be it. If you're looking for any kind of like commentary on television history from the 1960s, you might get a little bit of that here. Looking at some of the ways everything came together, especially the paint that they used on everybody in order to like make them pop when they're normally black and white, to make them pop in color. And how like they even the Count, they painted him blue just like he was painted for the show. But here he's in color. And again, no one ever questions it. No one ever says a thing. So it's something worth checking out. It's something worth diving into if you've got the time or you're bored or whatever. And as always, I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Let me know down in the comments section. As always, thank you very much for listening to the Podio commentary. I'm just trying to reboot it with more reviews over here. Maybe some long form stuff down the road. We'll see how things go. But I just want to get back to talking about movies, to talking about what I like, and to diving into these films and just kind of like gushing about them, because this was a love letter to the 1960s show. This was definitely something that Rob Zombie had passion for. It's very hard to adapt something like The Munsters and bring it into the modern age. I'm not saying he succeeded, but I'm also not saying that he failed. And I think that's something to take into account. But anyway, I will talk to you guys later. Have yourself a great night. Thank you again for watching, and peace out.